We need diplomats. Unfortunately, we don't have diplomats in Germany and in the United States right now because the foreign minister of Germany and the secretary of state of the United States are not engaging in diplomacy. They're engaging in war. This is different. Diplomacy is to sit down and talk to your counterpart to understand these issues. I was invited to give a talk to the G20 foreign ministers last year online when they were meeting in Bali. I said to them, you are the diplomats, meet with each other. I don't think that Foreign Minister Baerbock met with Foreign Minister Lavrov, though they were in the same room. We need diplomacy. There is no way out of this mess without diplomacy. And if the diplomats want to be the ministers of war, then we should have those who want to be diplomats engaging in diplomacy. And we need that dialogue. I am in everyday dialogue with multiple sides. I hear from the Russian point of view. I hear from Turkey as mediator. I hear from Ukrainians. I hear from Western governments. I hear from the United States. I hear from Brazil, China, others. There are important views that need to be explained, and we're not getting that at all. And the media has forgotten its role. The media's role is not to quote unnamed senior officials. That is not the role of the media. The media's role is to scrutinize, to express doubt, to ask hard questions, to challenge authority, because it's not surprising that at war, our governments tell tales. They want to present narratives. They want to hide facts. They want to hide hard truths. But the media, what is the media for? Is it just for advertising revenues? Is it just for having the ability to have a cup of coffee with the senior government official? Or is it to scrutinize and express doubt? Where's the German media on Nord Stream, for example? Here, a major piece of infrastructure was blown up, I believe most likely by the United States or the UK, but on the Western side, quiet, silence. When I said this on American television, I was immediately cut off. But then, by the way, all of the circumstantial evidence points in that way. Sweden, incredibly, says, okay, we've investigated, but we're not going to share the results of our investigation with Germany. Members of the Bundestag ask, we want to know the facts. The German government says, no, you cannot know the facts. This is a security issue. We're supposed to take this? We call ourselves democracies? And this is the level of discourse? So the media really, I mean, look, there's a lot of media and you're part of it and it's great. We're having a wonderful open discussion and points of view that are very hard to express actually in the mainstream. But this mainstream media has lost its way. I can't tell you how disappointed I am every day in the New York Times, because I grew up with the New York Times and I used to read it for the Pentagon Papers, for telling the lies about Vietnam, exposing them, for telling the lies of the Nixon administration. Now all it is a mouthpiece for government. You don't get anything different. I can't even publish an op-ed on sites that I was probably the main contributor in many cases, because the mainstream media have lost their sense of their role completely. It is absolutely troubling and strange.
I want to go through some counter arguments with you that are usually made. For example, the first part, NATO was also stationed in Poland and Latvia that has borders with Russia, and they have coexisted somewhat peacefully. NATO was not planning an intervention. And the second counter argument that is made is Ukraine is an independent and sovereign state, and has a right to make military deals with anyone it pleases, including NATO. How would you respond to these two arguments?
I would say that, first of all, NATO is often an aggressive force, almost an expeditionary force of U.S. foreign policy. Bombing Belgrade in 1999 was completely unjustified. The actions that NATO took in Libya, in my opinion, completely unjustified and far exceeded the UN mandate. And the United States foreign policy is based on regime change. So how much trust can there be, especially after events like the Maidan? The United States is not a peace-loving country. It is a power-seeking country. Not surprisingly, perhaps. I'm told by smart cynics, well, isn't that always the case? And maybe it is. But then let's not kid ourselves with the rhetoric that is used. The United States has overthrown dozens of governments. It definitely contributed to the overthrow of Yanukovych. It definitely tried to overthrow al-Assad in Syria and was a major provocation of the war there. And I know this from the inside, not just from the outside. So I just want to be clear that I know from top people involved in these issues what I'm discussing right now. So this is one thing. This idea of this peace-loving is not what a military alliance is. This is a military alliance that serves military and geopolitical purposes, and it should show restraint. In my opinion, by the way, just to put it clearly, when the Warsaw Pact was disbanded by Gorbachev, I think NATO should have ended. That's my own view. We should have gone to OSCE. We should have gone to a European security arrangement. But we didn't, because the neocons in the United States said, okay, now's really our chance. And I was at a conference recently in Eastern Europe where a NATO spokesman came in. It looked almost like a Star Wars event. He was full in uniform and there was a screen in back. And he talked about how NATO plays the vital role in the Black Sea region, and it will be crucial for Eurasia, or something like that. I said, oh my God, what is this? It's almost like a cartoon. I don't want to hear that. I was at an economics conference, by the way. I don't want to see NATO officials at an economics conference. So this is really, really an important point. And because this is a military alliance, it's not true that you just get to choose who you have your military alliances. There's a concept called externalities, which is that your choice may have adverse consequences for the one next door. Should the U.S. have a NATO base in the Sea of Azov? Well, Russia doesn't think so. By the way, I don't think so. I don't think it's prudent. And I don't think it's smart of Ukraine to not recognize that it's in a delicate balancing act and should be prudent and careful. And I'm living and experiencing, well, I'm seeing successive neutrality in many places. Let's just put it this way. And in my view, you be careful in this world. And you recognize that military alliances are dangerous because they lead to wars often. We should not have these military alliances. We should not be expanding military alliances in Asia to counter China. These are dangerous provocations. If you want really a historical analogy, it is maybe 1910. All these alliances being built. Well, and then a tripwire was crossed in 1914, and the world was never the same again. But let's avoid that.
In December last year, there was a lot of voicing for diplomacy stated by French President Macron, even President Biden. The German Chancellor, for example, even spoke to Putin for an hour on the phone, reportedly. However, the tone has completely shifted since the start of the new year. To begin the new year, NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said, and I'm quoting him here, "Weapons are in fact the way to peace." Now we're seeing all sorts of weapons, from armored vehicles, artillery, Patriot defense systems being committed to Ukraine. And the UK has now upped the ante by sending the Challenger 2 battle tanks. All eyes are on Berlin now. All the pressure is on Berlin. Tomorrow they're meeting, all the defense ministers are meeting at Ramstein Air Base. And it is expected that Germany will at some point capitulate to all this pressure and send also battle tanks known as the Leopard 2. What advice would you give to leaders of this conference if you were participating as well? And do you think advanced offensive weapons could change the tide of war?
The advice I would give to leaders, period, is sit down and start talking. Most importantly, President Biden and President Putin. And how can we have an approach that does not also include negotiations? This is mind-boggling. You see, it's quite interesting. Our top general in the United States, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said, now is the time to negotiate. The next day, Victoria Nuland, who's our neocon in chief in the State Department, said, no negotiations. The whole idea is to bat down at all times any possibility of discussion. The only thing that's allowed in the narrative is war. Negotiations not even to be tried. So aside from all the weapon systems and whatever one thinks, open negotiations. And understand, by the way, and it's quite clear, Chancellor Scholz said to Putin at the beginning of all of this, NATO won't enlarge on my watch. He said, yes, you're Chancellor of Germany. What about NATO itself? How long are you going to be there? And the point is very simple. This is, first of all, a U.S.-led alliance. This is a 30-year U.S. project to expand NATO. President Biden's only words on this are, the door is open. The United States repeats at every occasion that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. What the Europeans could say clearly to Biden is, come on, you have put us in a terrible bind. You are crushing our industry. You're bringing us closer to war, and all over something that should not have happened at all, which was this intention to expand NATO, because when that was put on the table in 2008, Germany was against it. France was against it. I know. I talked to the leaders then. But they don't say it publicly. They don't admit the truth. And then the media obscure all of this history. So my recommendation is open negotiations.
To my last questions, according to the United Nations, 7,000 civilians have been killed since the war started, including 433 children. Most recently, 30 to 40 civilians were killed when a Russian missile hit a high-story building in the city of Dnipro. Given that Russia and even Ukraine are not signatory of the International Criminal Court, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock recently called for a special tribunal to be set up at The Hague that should pursue Russian leadership for its crimes in Ukraine. So this is a two-part question. A question, should the West play the role of moral authority? And B, will a special tribunal assist in resolving the conflict and bring justice?
No and no. This is just provocation. Let's end this war. Let's understand that both sides are party to this war, that there were tremendous Western provocations, that there are terrible outcomes in wars committed by both sides, that there is propaganda up the wazoo, as we would say, and hype and so forth. So let's have serious negotiations. And frankly, let's have some diplomacy from Germany. Diplomacy. That means diplomacy to sit down with counterparts in Russia, to talk, to learn, to understand, to find a path to peace.